They thought she was nothing. Just another pair of hands refilling glasses. A shadow in a black and white uniform. Someone you forget the moment you look away. But the night the most feared man from the Mediterranean underworld stepped into the restaurant, the room didn't empty of sound, it emptied of oxygen. Men who had ordered executions with a nod suddenly forgot how to breathe. And when the timid waitress finally reached his table, she didn't trip. She didn't spill a drop. She looked him straight in the eye and spoke 5 words in a dialect that hadn't been heard beyond a handful of mountain villages since the early 90s. The restaurant didn't go quiet. It froze. Because that wasn't small talk. It was a verdict. And only 3 people in the room understood why. This is the story of Elena Mero, the waitress who hid a fallen empire beneath her apron. The dinner rush at Il Fire Rent was never calm, but that night it felt like a coordinated panic attack masquerading as fine dining. Nestled among the steel towers of Lower Manhattan, the restaurant was a shrine to wealth, veined marble floors, polished walnut walls, and lighting soft enough to make billion-dollar deals feel intimate. The kind of place where a single bottle of wine could cover a month of Elena's rent, and conversations floated between hedge funds, hostile takeovers, and crimes disguised as strategy. Elena tightened the knot of her apron until the fabric bit into her waist. She caught her reflection in the chrome surface of the espresso machine, pale skin, dark shadows under her eyes, hair twisted into a careless knot that passed for effort. The uniform hung loose on her frame, deliberately unflattering. Perfect. Forgettable. Elena. Table 7. Water. Now. The floor supervisor, Carl Whitman, snapped his fingers inches from her face. He always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desperation, like a man one missed paycheck away from collapse. Yes, sir, she murmured, eyes glued to the floor tiles. S.H. E drifted through the dining room the way she always did, quiet, unnoticed, almost unreal. It was a skill she'd learned young. Survival didn't come from strength. It came from absence. If you weren't seen, you weren't remembered. If you weren't remembered, you stayed alive. For nearly 4 years, Elena had lived that way in New York, cash-only sublets in Queens, borrowed names on paperwork, jobs that paid under the table. Never lingering. Never staring. Never letting anyone look at her long enough to ask questions. But tonight, the air felt wrong. Not the usual Friday tension. This was heavier. Sharper. Like a storm pressing down before the first crack of thunder. The kitchen had been buzzing since mid-afternoon. The head chef, normally a tyrant who hurled plates for sport, was personally polishing countertops. The staff whispered instead of joked. Big reservation, muttered Luis, one of the runners, as he passed Elena with a tray stacked high. The owner cleared the entire upper level, another added under their breath. Elena felt a cold prickle crawl up her spine. Who is it? She asked quietly. A governor? Luis shook his head, eyes wide. No. Bigger. He leaned closer. The Valcoras. The glass in Elena's hand slipped, just slightly, before she caught it. Ice water splashed against her wrist, sending a chill straight to her bones. Valcora. In business columns, they were logistics executives and shipping magnates. In places Elena avoided at all costs, they were something else entirely. Luca Valcora was the modern face, polished, ruthless, educated abroad. But if the restaurant was clearing the upper floor, that meant the past had arrived with him. I need a break, Elena whispered, heart pounding. No breaks, Whitman snapped from the service station. They're already here. Everyone line up. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. Running now would draw eyes. Being noticed was worse than staying. Elena took her place at the end of the staff line near the stairs, head B. Ode, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken in years, not for safety, but for invisibility. The front doors opened. The temperature dropped. 4 men entered first, security. Their suits were immaculate, their expressions vacant, eyes scanning the room with mechanical precision. Then came Luca Valcora. Elena risked a glance. He was devastatingly composed, dressed in a slate gray suit tailored to perfection. Every step was deliberate, fluid, dangerous. A man who treated violence like a solved problem. But the room didn't lock up for him. It locked up for the man behind him. Don Renato Valcora. The old patriarch moved slowly, leaning on a black cane capped with a silver wolf's head. A fedora shadowed his face, deep lines carved into his skin like history itself. He looked less like a businessman and more like a relic, something that should have stayed buried. Forks froze midair. Conversations died. Whitman nearly tripped over himself. "Welcome, Don Valcora." "It's an honor." Luca lifted a hand. Silence. "Table," he said. As the group passed the staff line, Elena held her breath. "Don't look up. Don't exist. Don't." The cane stopped inches from her shoe. "This one," Don Renato said, voice rough as gravel. "She's trembling." Luca exhaled sharply. "Papa, please. Let's sit." "Fear is honest," the old man murmured. The silver tip of his cane nudged Elena's shoe. "Look at me, ragazza." For the briefest instant, Elena closed her eyes, gathering the mask she'd perfected. The scared girl. The nobody. She looked up slowly, eyes wide, lip quivering just enough. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, pitching her voice higher. I've never seen anyone famous in person before." Don Renato steadied her. His eyes, sharp, calculating, searched her face like a ledger being reviewed. For one terrible second, Elena was certain he saw past the apron. Past the fear. Straight into the blood she had spent years trying to outrun. And then... nothing. But... the silence that followed was far more dangerous than recognition. He laughed. Not a warm laugh, something brittle and dry, like air scraping through rusted metal. A sound that carried authority because everyone at the table had learned to fear it. "Well then," he said lazily. "Bring the wine, little sparrow. And try not to break it." They moved past her. Only after they were gone did Amelia realize she was shaking. Her knees knocked softly together beneath her skirt as she exhaled, slow and shallow. She had survived the arrival. Barely. And somehow, that felt like the easiest part of the night. Across the mezzanine, Luca Ferraro loosened the button of his tailored jacket and sat down, his eyes sweeping the upper level by instinct. Stairwell covered. Kitchen entrance covered. 2 men where they were supposed to be. Still, his shoulders stayed tense. Having his father in Manhattan was a strategic nightmare. Enzo Ferraro belonged to another era, one that didn't care about federal task forces or digital surveillance. He didn't fear wiretaps. He didn't acknowledge laws that had been written after he'd already buried men for breaking older ones. What Enzo cared about was respect. And wine. And reminding his son, at every opportunity, that the American operation was not being run correctly. "This place," Enzo muttered, waving his cane toward the soaring ceiling. "It has no soul. Feels like a financial office." "You don't eat in a bank, Luca," he added dryly. "It's contemporary," Luca replied evenly, lifting a hand to signal the sommelier. "People like this kind of space." Luca didn't want the sommelier. He wanted a double scotch and silence. Instead, his father snorted. "People like what they are told to like. Tradition teaches taste." Enzo leaned back, surveying the table. His former advisor, Marco, sat stiffly beside him, along with 2 guards brought directly from the hills overseas. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Enzo's eyes narrowed. "Where's the sparrow?" I asked F. "Or wine?" Luca glanced toward the floor manager, who turned pale and urgently nudged the trembling waitress toward the stairs. Luca watched her approach. She was smaller than he'd noticed earlier. Too thin. Ash-pale skin. Wide brown eyes darting like a trapped animal's. She carried the heavy bottle of Barolo as if it might explode in her hands. She's going to pass out, Luca thought grimly. Perfect. Another problem. Open it, Enzo commanded. As Emilia reached the table, her fingers trembled, visibly, unmistakably. But Luca caught something strange. The instant the corkscrew pierced the foil, the shaking stopped. Her hand steadied. Her posture shifted. Movements that had been frantic turned deliberate, almost graceful. She angled the bottle just right, applied clean pressure, and eased the cork free with barely a sound. No pop. No spill. A flawless pour. Luca's eyes narrowed. Interesting. She placed the glass before Enzo. The old man lifted it, swirling the wine slowly, theatrically. He inhaled, then looked up at her with a sharp, playful glint. He was testing her. He always tested the staff. Humiliation was a sport to him, a reminder of hierarchy. "You're Italian?" Enzo asked in English. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "My grandmother." "From where?" "Near Naples, sir." Enzo scoffed, flicking his hand. "Naples. Loud mouths. Pickpockets and street singers." Luca saw it, the faintest tightening of her jaw. Just a flash. Not fear. Pride. Enzo leaned forward, switching languages. "You even understand this? Or are you just another American girl with an extra vowel in her name?" Emilia lowered her gaze. "I understand a little, signore," she replied in broken, careful Italian. Enzo smiled thinly. Then he turned to Marco, and shifted again. This time, the language was different. Not Italian. Not even standard Sicilian. It was the dense, archaic dialect of the inland mountains. A private tongue. One shaped by isolation, by shepherds and smugglers, by bloodlines that had never bought. Here translating themselves for outsiders. "Look at her," Enzo said in that dialect, grinning. "Pretty enough. Empty eyes. Like a lamb waiting for the knife. We could take her home. Let her warm a bed before she's forgotten." It was deliberate. Crude. A trap. Enzo loved speaking filth in that dialect. If someone reacted, he knew they understood. If they didn't, they were beneath notice. Luca stiffened. "Enough," he warned in English. But it was already too late. Emilia had begun to step back, clutching the tray to her chest. She should have left. She should have vanished. But the words, those specific words, cut past fear and lodged somewhere older. Deeper. She stopped. Turned. The silence was absolute. Luca stared, confused. Was she about to cry? She met Enzo's gaze. The fear was gone. Her spine straightened. Her chin lifted. And for one terrifying heartbeat, she didn't look like a waitress at all. She looked untouchable. When she spoke, the voice wasn't soft. It wasn't high. It carried weight, low, precise, perfectly measured. "The lamb that survives," she said, "is the one who watches while the wolf sleeps. And a guest who insults the bread of his host wakes to ashes." She spoke the dialect. His dialect. Not just fluently, but correctly. Using phrasing that hadn't been common for decades. Words pulled straight from the Ferraro homeland. The sound of impact rang out as Marco's fork clattered onto his plate. Both guards reached inside their jackets in one smooth motion. Luca didn't move. He couldn't. He was watching his father. For the first time in his life, Enzo Ferraro looked shaken. His mouth parted slightly. Color drained from his face. He stared at Emilia as if she'd stepped out of a grave. "Who," he whispered, "are you?" The moment shattered. Emilia's eyes widened. Horror rushed back in as the weight of what she'd done hit her all at once. I need to get the antipasti," she gasped. And she ran. Not walking. Not hesitating. She bolted for the kitchen. Get her! Enzo roared, slamming his cane down hard enough to shatter a wine glass. Bring her to me. Luca was already moving. Stay here, he snapped to his men. He vaulted the mezzanine railing, hit the floor running, and burst through the kitchen doors just in time to see the back exit swinging shut. Move, he shouted, shoving a frozen sous chef aside. He kicked the door open and charged into the rain-soaked alley, heart pounding as he scanned the darkness. And realized the night had truly begun. Left, then right. Boots splashed through shallow puddles as he cut down the narrow service alley, the rain turning the asphalt slick beneath his feet. At the far end, under a flickering amber streetlight, he finally spotted her. She was already climbing. Not scrambling. Not panicking. She moved up the chain-link fence with fluid precision, fingers finding holds instinctively, feet barely slipping. The kind of speed and control no late-night server should ever have. Stop, he shouted. His hand flew to the pistol secured at the small of his back, muscle memory kicking in before thought could catch up. She paused. Perched at the top of the fence, rain clinging to her jacket, she turned her head and looked back at him. The streetlight carved sharp shadows across her face as their eyes locked. He expected fear. Instead, he saw assessment. Strategy. A calm, measured awareness that made his stomach tighten. She wasn't fleeing like prey. She was withdrawing like someone trained to survive. You don't understand what you've just done, he called, stepping closer, rain soaking through his coat. Her voice carried clearly across the alley, steady despite the distance. Oh, I understand exactly who you are, Luca Caruso. His breath caught. And I know, she continued, that if your father discovers who I really am, he won't just kill me. He'll turn this city into ashes to make sure no one like me ever stands again. Then she dropped. Her boots hit the pavement on the other side, and a heartbeat later, she was gone, swallowed by darkness, rain, and the city itself. Luca stood there alone, chest heaving, adrenaline roaring in his ears. The fence rattled softly in the wind, mocking him. He tapped his earpiece. Sir? His security chief's voice crackled through. Do we initiate lockdown on the restaurant? Forget the restaurant, Luca snapped, eyes fixed on the empty space where she'd vanished. Find the girl. Find out everything. And make sure my father doesn't reach her first. She didn't stop running until her lungs felt like they were lined with fire. She cut through streets without pattern, doubling back through alleys, slipping into a subway station just long enough to disappear into the crowd, then exiting without boarding a train. She resurfaced blocks away, soaked, shaking, and burning with adrenaline. Only then did she duck into a harshly lit, all-night laundromat. The smell of detergent and damp fabric hit her instantly. She collapsed into a molded plastic chair in the back corner, hidden behind a wall of rumbling dryers. The machines thundered around her, metal drums spinning endlessly, drowning out her uneven breathing. She folded forward, pressing her forehead against her knees, trying to stop the tremors ripping through her body. Stupid. So stupid. Years of disappearing, of dyeing her hair a dull, forgettable shade. Years of oversized clothes and lowered eyes. Years of forcing the fire inside her to stay buried. All undone because of a single insult. But it wasn't just the insult. It was the accent. That cadence. Hearing it had pulled something loose inside her, a reflex carved into her long before she was old enough to name it. A memory she had tried to kill and failed. Her pocket vibrated. The burner phone. Cheap. Disposable. Meant for one purpose only. She flipped it open. One message glowed on the screen. They're searching. Leave now. Her jaw tightened. She snapped the phone shut, crushed it in her fist, and ripped the SIM card free. The pieces clattered into a nearby trash bin. Going back wasn't an option. The apartment was compromised. The emergency cash hidden beneath the floorboards, gone. The forged passport that said her name was Elena Marini, useless now. She wasn't that woman anymore. She was who she had always been. She checked her pockets, a few crumpled bills from tips, a locker key, the small folding knife she never left behind. Okay, she whispered to the humming machines. Think. Her father's voice surfaced in her mind, sharp and unyielding. The memory hurt, but the lesson mattered more. Lesson 4. When the hunter is close, don't run home. Run where tracks disappear. Water. She stood, wiped rain and tears from her face, and walked back out into the night. She needed the docks, down in Harbor Point. There was an old contact there. A man who owed her family a debt that time, and death had never erased. Back at the restaurant, the mood was suffocating. The dining room stood empty, tables abandoned mid-service. Staff were confined to the kitchen, phones confiscated, whispers echoing off steel surfaces. Luca paced the private room, watching his father. Don Matteo Caruso sat motionless, staring at a blank stretch of wall. In the span of an hour, he seemed to have aged a decade. A glass of grappa trembled slightly in his hand. The team is wiping the camera footage, Luca said quietly. Her employee records were fabricated. Fake address. Fake ID. She doesn't exist. Matteo didn't look at him. She spoke the old tongue, he said. Not just the dialect, the code. I heard it, Luca replied, pouring himself a drink. She warned you. No, Matteo snapped. She corrected me. He finally turned, eyes dark and unsettled. That phrase, it was used by only one bloodline. Spoken by their women to remind arrogant men who held authority. Luca's grip tightened around the glass. There's only one family who used it exactly that way. The name didn't need saying, but Matteo said it anyway. The Bellin. 'Tis. Luca froze. They're gone, he said. You made sure of that. 25 years ago. The purge. I believed I did, Matteo murmured. But Vittorio Bellanti had a daughter. 12 years old. We found remains. Dental records matched. Records can be altered, Luca said slowly, realization crashing in. If someone had the resources. The Bellantis had been the only house powerful enough to rival theirs, old world, relentless, bound by honor rather than greed. If that girl is Sofia Bellanti, Matteo said, his voice hardening, then she carries a vendetta with my name etched into it. Luca felt a chill crawl up his spine. She's been here how long? Half a year, Luca answered. Serving drinks. Passing us every day. And all that time, she could have ended them. Find her, Matteo ordered, rising with sudden strength, cane striking the floor. The weakness vanished. The lion returned. Before the Marinos learn she's alive. If our rivals rally behind her, this city will bleed. I'll bring her in, Luca said. Alive. Matteo's gaze was cold. I want to see her eyes when I finish what I started. Luca turned and stepped into the night, but as the cool air hit his face, he made his choice. He would find her. And when he did, he wouldn't hand her over so easily. He could have handed her over to his father without hesitation. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. But for the first time in his life, Marco Bellini hesitated. Because Marco Bellini didn't understand her yet, and for a man who already owned power, money, and fear itself, a mystery was the only thing left worth pursuing. Rain in Manhattan doesn't cleanse anything. It just smears the filth around, turning the city into a slick reflection of itself. By the time Elena Russo reached the far end of the waterfront in South Brooklyn, the storm had reduced the skyline to a trembling blur of neon lights and wet concrete. Her coat clung to her frame, soaked through. Every step sent a jolt of pain up her leg, but she didn't slow down. The docks loomed ahead, an iron graveyard of rusted containers and skeletal cranes, frozen mid-reach like the remains of extinct monsters. Elena limped toward a decaying bait shack perched at the edge of Pier 39. From the outside, it looked abandoned. The windows were sealed with warped plywood, the boards rotted around old, rusted nails. Anyone else would have turned around. Elena knew better. 3 feet below the waterline, a pressure sensor waited. And if you knocked wrong, if your rhythm was even slightly off, the shotgun wired behind the doorframe would tear straight through your chest. She raised her hand and knocked. 2 quick taps. 1 slow. 3 sharp knocks. Silence. Then came the screech of corroded metal as a deadbolt slid free. The door cracked open just enough to reveal darkness and the unmistakable barrel of a pump-action shotgun. "We're closed," a voice growled, gravelly and old, like chains dragged across stone. "The tide's high, Carlo," Elena said calmly, despite the shiver running through her. "But the fish aren't biting." The shotgun lowered instantly. The door swung open, and Carlo Il Masaleo de Luca stood there. Nearly 70, broad-shouldered, wearing a stained sleeveless shirt that exposed arms layered in faded prison ink. He was the man who had once smuggled her out of southern Italy, wrapped inside a carpet on a trawler, the night her entire family was erased. "Elena," he breathed, eyes widening. He pulled her inside and slammed the door shut, locking it, once, twice, 3 times. "Madonna, I thought you were uptown," he whispered. "I thought you were safe." "I was," Elena said, sliding down against a stack of lobster cages until she hit the floor. "Until tonight." Carlo crouched in front of her as she spoke the words he feared most. "I saw him," she said quietly. "I saw Raphael." Carlo went pale. He shoved a towel into her hands and pressed a half-empty bottle of cheap brandy against her palm. "You saw him? Did he see you?" "He saw a waitress," Elena replied, swallowing the liquor as it burned down her throat. "But then he insulted the family. In the old dialect." She met Carlo's eyes. "I answered him." Carlo shut his eyes, muttering a curse under his breath. "You answered the devil in his own tongue," he said grimly. "Now they'll all be hunting." "I need what my father left," Elena said, her voice steady. "The package." Carlo hesitated. He studied her, the girl he'd kept hidden for 2 decades. "It's a death sentence," he warned. "Open that case, and you don't go back to pouring drinks. You become what you were born as. You become the mark." "I already am," Elena said, standing. Fatigue drained away, replaced by something colder. Sharper. "Give it to me." Carlo exhaled, defeated. The look in her eyes was the same one her father, Lorenzo Russo, used to wear before ordering bloodshed. He moved behind the counter and pried up a loose plank in the floor. From the darkness beneath, he lifted a steel briefcase wrapped in oil-soaked cloth and placed it on the counter. Elena ran her fingers across the cold metal. Inside were offshore account codes, sleeper agent contacts scattered across Europe, and the Crimson Ledger. A record of every bribe, every execution, every betrayal committed by the rival families over 3 decades. It was leverage powerful enough to burn empires. "Take it," Carlo said urgently. "There's a boat at the end of the pier. The ignition key's taped under the rail. Get across the river." "They won't come for you," Elena said softly. "They don't know you're alive." The skylight exploded. Glass cascaded down like falling stars as ropes dropped from the ceiling beams. Before Carlo could raise his shotgun, a flashbang detonated in the center of the room. White. Soundless. Then screaming noise. Elena was hurled into the traps, the air torn from her lungs. Through smoke and ringing ears, she saw silhouettes descending, night vision, suppressors, perfect F. Formation. Not police. Not street soldiers. Professional. Carlo roared and fired blindly. One shadow fell, but 3 red laser dots settled on his chest. "No!" Elena screamed. Gunfire snapped. 3 rounds struck Carlo. He collapsed behind the counter, dead before he hit the floor. There was no time to grieve. Elena grabbed the briefcase and rolled as bullets shredded the space where she'd stood moments earlier. She dove behind an industrial freezer, yanked the door open as a temporary shield, and bolted for the rear exit. Sparks flew as rounds ricocheted off steel. She burst onto the pier. Rain lashed sideways. Wind screamed. The small fishing boat pitched violently against its ropes. She ran. Nowhere left to go, princess. Elena skidded to a halt. Standing between her and the boat was Marco Bellini. Alone. No tactical gear. No backup. Just a handgun hanging loosely at his side. His suit was ruined, hair plastered to his forehead, rain streaming down his face. You led them to me, Elena hissed, clutching the case, backing toward the edge. I didn't, Marco shouted over the storm. I came alone. Look at them, those aren't my people. Elena glanced back at the shadows spilling onto the pier and realized he was telling the truth. And suddenly, Marco Bellini wanted answers far more than he wanted her dead. The bait shack exploded with noise. The back door burst open, and a tactical unit flooded out onto the pier in a hard, practiced wave. Black armor. Raised rifles. Red laser dots jittered across the wood planks, and not just on her, but on Marco, too. Drop the weapon, Rinaldi, the squad leader barked. Now. We've got clearance to wipe the board clean. Marco blinked, just for a heartbeat. Confused. Off balance. What the hell is? It's a takeover, you moron. Elena shouted. Down. She didn't run. She didn't dive for the river. Instead, she slipped a hand into the pocket of her grease-stained server apron, the ridiculous apron she was still wearing, and closed her fingers around the cold metal she'd lifted off the bait shop floor when the first soldier went down. The flash device. She yanked the pin and hurled it in a smooth arc over Marco's shoulder. The detonation was immediate. White light. A concussive crack that slammed into bone and brain. Marco recoiled, cursing, hands flying to his eyes. When his vision cleared, the team was chaos, men shouting, staggering, weapons lowered as they fought blindness. Move! Elena screamed. She seized Marco by the collar of his tailored coat and dragged him toward the edge of the pier. What are you doing? He yelled, heels skidding on wet boards. Keeping you alive long enough to finish you later. She shoved him. Hard. Marco pitched backward, arms flailing, and vanished into the black water below with a violent splash. The riv. Swallowed him whole. Elena didn't hesitate. She clutched the steel briefcase tight to her chest and jumped after him. Gunfire erupted. Rounds tore into the surface of the water, stitching it with violent splashes and trails of bubbles that buzzed like furious insects, but the river was faster. Dark. Relentless. It dragged them under. The world beneath the pier was a nightmare. Rotting wooden pylons rose like crooked trees. Barnacles scraped skin. The stench was overwhelming: oil, sewage, rust, and something sour that burned the lungs. Marco burst to the surface beneath the pier, gasping, choking as freezing water clawed at his chest. His muscles screamed. He thrashed, searching blindly for something solid. Quiet. The word hissed from the darkness. He froze. Elena clung to a piling just a few feet away, teeth chattering uncontrollably. Her uniform was plastered to her body, hair slicked flat against her face. The briefcase was cinched to her wrist with a scavenged belt. Her eyes weren't on him. They were on the slivers of light above. Boots thundered across the pier overhead. Flashlights sliced through gaps in the planks, beams stabbing down into the murk. Clear, a voice echoed. They went under. Current probably carried them off. Prep thermal drone. Thermal, Marco whispered, panic swelling. Now, Elena snapped. Shut up. Follow me. Stay low. One splash too loud, I leave you. She pushed off and slipped into the maze beneath the pier, swimming with a quiet, efficient stroke. Marco followed, body locking up from the cold. He trained daily. Fought professionally. But he was barely keeping pace with the woman who had poured his wine barely a few hours ago. She led him to a rusted maintenance ladder, its rungs slick with algae. They climbed, hands numb, fingers barely responding. The tunnel swallowed them. A storm drained beneath the highway. Dry enough. Narrow. Reeking of wet concrete and rats. They collapsed onto a ledge, chests heaving. Marco lay on his BA. CK, staring at the curved ceiling, lungs burning. Those men, he said finally. Russian gear. But their accents were American. Contractors, Elena replied, wringing water from her hair. She checked the case, sealed. Untouched. High-tier ones. Who sent them? She laughed. It was sharp. Bitter. My father wouldn't outsource my death. He'd want to see it happen. And they tried to kill you, Marco. You saw the targeting lasers. He went quiet. She was right. Someone wants a war, he said slowly. If both bloodlines die tonight, who profits? Chaos feeds the desperate, Elena murmured. She hugged herself, shivering. The small crews aren't smart enough. The broke ones can't afford this. Marco sat up, dread curdling in his gut. It's internal. Someone knew where I'd be. Only if you did, she said evenly. Your father. Your security chief. Or. He hesitated. The advisor, she finished. The one at dinner. The one who laughed. Marco stood, pacing the tight space. I need a phone. You touch a phone, you're dead, Elena said calmly. Voice tracking. Signal triangulation. And if he's behind this, he already has access to the surveillance tech your family bought last year. Marco stopped. Looked at her. Really looked. Mud on her face. Cold shaking her hands. A stolen briefcase on her lap. She wasn't a waitress. She was command. You know too much, he said quietly. I watched you for years, she replied. Your habits. Your routes. Your weaknesses. Information is the only weapon that never runs dry. Then why not kill us earlier, he asked. You had chances. She looked down, jaw tight. Because timing matters, she said. And tonight, everything finally lined up. The woman tightened her grip on the briefcase, and for just a heartbeat, the fury drained from her face. In its place was a ghost of a child, a 13-year-old girl who had once watched her entire world burn. Because death is the easy way out, she said quietly. Her voice barely carried over the echo. ING tunnel, but every word landed like a hammer. Your father murdered my mother. He slaughtered my brothers. He set my home on fire and stood there while it collapsed. She swallowed, steadying herself. If I put a bullet in his skull, he dies a legend. The mighty Marco DeLuca feared, respected, remembered. She lifted her gaze, eyes igniting. I don't want him remembered. I want him erased. I want him to watch everything he built rot from the inside out. I want him to know that Arasi destroyed him, not with a gun, but with the truth. She tapped the metal case beside her boot. This is the truth, Luca. The Crimson Ledger. It documents the secret alliance between the 5 syndicates and half the people sworn to uphold the law, senators, judges, labor bosses, all of them. If this gets out, the Bureau doesn't just arrest your family. They burn the entire system to the ground. The DeLuca name doesn't fall, it turns to ash. Luca stared at the briefcase as if it were radioactive. That book doesn't exist, he said slowly. My father swore it was destroyed. He said it burned when your house went up. He lied, she replied flatly. He threw it from a second-floor window to my uncle seconds before the roof caved in. Luca dragged a hand through his hair, the reality closing in around him like concrete walls. He was standing knee-deep in filthy runoff with a woman who could obliterate his entire life, and somewhere above them, a traitor was hunting them both. So what happens now? He asked. You release it. I go to prison. You get your revenge. She shook her head. I can't release it yet. It's encrypted, layered, messy. The key isn't simple. And the moment I surface long enough to crack it, Silvio's hit team finds me. Her eyes flicked to him. And now that they know you're alive, they'll come for you too. She pushed herself upright, favoring her left leg as pain shot through it. We're in a bind, Luca. By every rule of this world, we should already be killing each other. I should put you down and gamble on escaping with the book. And you should be trying to knock me unconscious and take it. But if we do that, Luca cut in, stepping closer, Silvio wins. She nodded once. He takes control. He buries my father. Then he hunts us until there's nothing left. Luca hesitated, then extended his hand. It was insanity. A De Luca offering a truce to a Rossi. A gesture that spat on a century of bloodshed. A ceasefire, he said. At least until we survive the night. Until we confirm whether Silvio is the one pulling the strings. I'll get you somewhere secure. You keep the ledger sealed. She steadied his outstretched hand. The old scars across his knuckles. The exhaustion in his eyes. Eyes that didn't belong to a man raised by a tyrant. She didn't take his hand. I don't shake hands with De Lucas, she said coolly. But I won't kill you tonight. Let on. You know this city better than I do. Luca let his hand fall, a crooked smile tugging at his mouth. You're terrifying, he muttered. I'm just a cafe server, she replied dryly. Right, he said. And I'm just an environmental waste consultant. He gestured down the tunnel. There's an exit near the west side. I've got a place off the books. Nobody knows about it, not even my father. She limped past him. A hideout for your girlfriends? For my paintings, he corrected. She stopped, glancing back in genuine surprise. You paint? Everyone needs a way to stay sane, he grumbled. Move. Before the rats decide we're food. They walked together through the darkness, two heirs to shattered empires, heading toward a future that promised nothing but violence. But something shifted as they moved. They weren't hunter and hunted anymore. They were allies. And in the underworld, alliances forged by necessity often outlast those built on love. Neither of them noticed the faint red pulse on the handle of the briefcase. It wasn't a bomb. It was a tracker. High above the city, in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the park, Silvio Ferrante watched a blinking dot crawl beneath the streets on a tablet screen. He smiled, swirling amber liquor in his glass. Found you, he murmured. Kill the father. Kill the son. And bring me the girl. His smile widened. The Rossi which has something that belongs to me. The safe house shattered every expectation she had. She'd imagined a concrete bunker, no windows, weapons lining the walls, a mattress tossed in the corner. Instead, Luca unlocked a massive steel door and led her into a soaring loft with exposed beams and skylights. The air smelled of turpentine and oil paint, not gunpowder. Canvas covered every wall. Huge, chaotic works, violent reds and blacks twisting into screaming faces, reaching hands, silent agony frozen in paint. You weren't lying, she whispered, setting the heavy briefcase down on a spotless white sofa. You really do paint. It keeps the ghosts quiet, Luca said, sealing the door and activating the keypad lock. He crossed to a small kitchenette, pulled out a first aid kit, and nodded toward her leg. Sit. Let me see that. She hesitated, then obeyed. The adrenaline had drained, replaced by a deep, pulsing ache where she'd scraped herself fleeing the docks. Luca knelt in front of her, carefully cutting away the torn fabric of her uniform. His hands known for violence, were steady and gentle. Superficial, he said after cleaning the wound. No stitches. You've got good hands, she murmured. For a De Luca. He paused, looking up. Their faces were close now. Too close. The tension in the room changed. Not danger. Something heavier. Magnetic. And you're full of secrets, he replied quietly. For Arasi. He finished wrapping her leg but didn't move away. Why did you save me? He asked. Really? You could have let them take me out. She glanced back at the unfinished portrait on the easel, a woman with tired, sorrowful eyes. Because I saw you tonight, she said. When your father humiliated me. You Flynn. Ched. She met his gaze. You hated it. You're not him, Lucas said, his voice edged with bitterness. I am. He shoved himself out of the chair and crossed the loft, stopping at the tall windows. He parted the blinds just enough to scan the dark city below, neon bleeding into rain-slick streets. I run his operation. I bury his mistakes. I keep the family standing, he muttered. I was raised for this. I'm the crown prince. You're a captive, Elena said quietly. Just like I was. Luca turned back to her. For the first time, the armor cracked. The ruthless air vanished, replaced by a man carrying too much weight for one lifetime. We're just kids, she continued softly, scrubbing our father's hands clean of blood. Something unspoken pulled him toward her. He crossed the room without realizing he'd moved. His fingers brushed her cheek, hesitant, unsure. She didn't recoil. Instead, she leaned into his hand, eyes slipping shut as if the world beyond that touch had disappeared. If we survive this, Luca whispered, his voice barely audible, I'm done. I walk away. I take whatever money I can and disappear. There's no disappearing, Elena said, sadness threading her words. Not while Marco is hunting us. Not while that ledger exists. Her gaze dropped to the steel case resting near the table. A chill crept up her spine. Luca, she said sharply. What? The handle. He frowned. What about it? It's warm. Luca's breath caught. He lunged, flipping the case over. Near the hinge, embedded in the matte black metal, a pin-sized red light blinked, slow, deliberate. A tracker, he hissed. High frequency. How long? She asked, already forcing herself to stand despite the fire screaming through her injured leg. Luca checked his watch. His jaw tightened. If he picked us up near the docks, he's not coming alone, he said. He's bringing an army. The glass ceiling shattered. The skylight exploded inward with a deafening crack, raining shards across the loft, exactly T. Hiwe Nico had died. History looping back on itself. Ropes dropped from the opening above. Before Elena could react, Luca grabbed her and drove them both behind a massive oak drafting table as tear gas flooded the room. Masks, under the sink, he shouted, firing blindly over the table, muzzle flashes lighting the smoke. The front door detonated inward. Through the haze, shapes emerged, armed men moving with precision. And at their center stood Marco. His gas mask made him look inhuman, insect-like. In one hand, he dragged a coughing, staggering figure. Elena's stomach dropped. Victor Romano, the patriarch himself, was thrown onto the floor. He wasn't restrained, just dazed, hacking violently as the ventilation system began pulling the gas from the air. Marco tore off his mask, flashing a predator's grin. Come out, Luca, he called, voice booming off the high ceilings. Come introduce your little girlfriend to her future father-in-law. Luca glanced at Elena. He's using him as cover. No, she said, mind racing. He's staging this. He wants Victor to see us together. He wants to make you look like the traitor. We end it now, Luca said, checking his magazine. 6 rounds. 10 men. I have the case, Elena replied. And I know the code. She stood. No, Elena. Luca reached for her, but she was already moving. She stepped into the open, hands raised, the metal briefcase hanging from her left hand. Hold fire. Marco barked. He smiled slowly. Well, look at this. The barista returns. Victor struggled onto his hands and knees. He looked frail, confused, then his eyes locked onto Elena. A second later, he saw Luca behind her, gun raised. "Luca," Victor rasped. You're with her? With a Valenti?" "You told him I kidnapped her," Luca shouted. "Didn't you?" "Elena," Victor said weakly, coughing. "He told me my own son sold our secrets. That you were a plant. That he meant to kill me and take everything. And you believed him?" Luca yelled. "Look at him. He hired out. Siders. He tried to murder me at the pier." "Lies," Marco said smoothly, pressing his gun to Victor's temple. "Drop the weapon, Luca. Or the old king falls asleep forever." The room locked into stillness. Luca couldn't shoot without risking his father. Marco knew it. He held every advantage. "You want the ledger?" Elena asked, lifting the case slightly. "That's what this is really about, right?" "Give it to me," Marco snapped. "And maybe the boy lives. The old man's already past his expiration date." "You don't want it for blackmail," Elena said, voice rising. "You want it because of page 41. Marco's eyes flickered, just for a fraction of a second. Victor looked between them. "What's on that page?" "The skimming records," Elena said calmly. "From 1998 to 2008. She was lying about the page number, but not about the crime. He didn't serve you," she continued. "He robbed you. 10% off every shipment. Built himself an empire while bowing at your feet. She's lying." Marco shouted, finger tightening. "Kill them both." "Wait." Elena dropped to her knees. "I'll prove it." She placed the case on the floor and spun the dials. 12, 27, 91. The night her childhood home burned. Her father's cruel joke. Click. The latches popped open. Marco shoved Victor aside, greed overtaking caution. He aimed down at Elena. "Show me." She opened the case. Empty. Marco stared. "Where is it?" he screamed. "Where's the book?" Elena looked up, smiling, cold, fearless. "I burned it 3 years ago." She tapped her temple. "The power was never in the ledger." "It's in here." Marco raised his gun. Bang. The shot didn't come from Luca. Marco stiffened, eyes wide. He looked down as red bloomed across his chest. Slowly, he turned. Victor Romano stood behind him, shaking, holding a small .22 pistol pulled from his ankle holster, the one place Marco never checked. "You stole from me," Victor whispered, rage breaking through the tremor. "You stole from your king." Blood bubbled at Marco's lips as his legs finally gave out. He dropped to his knees, clutching at the air like he was trying to grab onto something: family, power, dignity, anything that hadn't already slipped away. "Family," he choked. Don Vittorio didn't hesitate. "I built you," the old man said coldly. "And I can unmake you." The gun cracked through the loft again. Marco's body slammed against the concrete and went still. For half a second, no one moved. The hired men standing near the shattered doorway exchanged glances. They weren't loyalists. They weren't soldiers. They were professionals. And professionals didn't die for free. No boss. No payout. No reason to stay. "Out," Luca shouted, swinging his pistol toward the door. "Walk away now, or I call the cops and bury you in paperwork in prison time." That was all it took. Boots scraped. Jackets brushed past broken glass. Within seconds, the mercenaries vanished into the night, swallowed by the rain and sirens far below. The silence that followed was worse than the gunshots. It pressed down on the room like a weight. Don Vittorio stood over the body, chest heaving, the gun trembling in his hand. Then his fingers loosened. The weapon clattered to the floor. His knees buckled, and he leaned hard against a steel support beam, suddenly looking every one of his years. Luca rushed to him, catching him before he slid down completely. "Dad," he said urgently, checking his pulse. "Talk to me. Are you all right?" Vittorio waved him off with a weak scoff. "I'm old," he muttered. Not finished. He straightened his coat with shaking hands and lifted his gaze. Elena was still kneeling near the open case, the one that was supposed to hold everything. Power. Leverage. Salvation. Instead, it was empty. Vittorio's cane lay nearby, tossed aside earlier in the chaos. "You lied," he rasped. Elena rose slowly to her feet, calm despite the blood, the death, the history breathing down her neck. "I bluffed," she said evenly. "That's how my family survived." For a long moment, Vittorio studied her in silence. Wind howled through the cracked skylight above them, rattling loose metal and sending rainwater dripping onto the floor. He really looked at her now, past the disguise, past the act, and something old and painful crossed his face. "You have your father's eyes," he said quietly. "And his refusal to bow." "And you owe me," Elena replied, her voice steady but unyielding. "I saved your son. I exposed the traitor eating your empire from the inside. And I spared you when I didn't have to." Vittorio closed his eyes. Then he nodded. "The balance is settled," he said. Blood answered with blood. He reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy gold ring, its surface worn smooth by decades of command. He turned it once in his fingers, then looked from Luca to Elena. "I'm tired," he admitted. "Tonight showed me I can't trust the men I raised." His gaze lingered on her. "The war ends here. Your family name is gone. From this night on, you are just Elena Rossi." Elena hesitated. She looked at Luca. She saw the hope he didn't try to hide. "Yes," she said softly. "Just Elena." Vittorio gave a small, satisfied grunt. "Good. My son needs a partner. Not a weapon." He narrowed his eyes, then smirked. "But if you ever use that street dialect in public again, I'll fire you." Luca laughed, a raw, relieved sound that cut through the tension like sunlight. He pulled Elena close, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Let's go home," he said. "All of us." The reopening of La Notte Bianca became the event everyone pretended was about food. Cameras flashed. Politicians smiled. Celebrities posed. But the real power sat at the corner table on the mezzanine. Luca sat at the head, tuxedo slightly undone, shoulders loose for the first time in years. He looked lighter. Happier. Don Vittorio sat beside him, frail but peaceful, sipping a deep red wine. "The service has improved," the old man noted. "I hired better management," Luca replied with a grin. Elena a proa. Ched. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wore a backless crimson dress that shimmered under the lights, the kind that announced its presence without asking permission. She carried no tray, only confidence. "Gentlemen," she said smoothly, resting her hand on Luca's shoulder. "Everything satisfactory?" "Perfect," Luca said, kissing her hand. Vittorio looked her up and down, unimpressed, until he wasn't. "The wine is excellent," he said. "The bread is cold." Elena leaned down beside him and whispered in flawless, old-world cadence. "Eat what's put in front of you, wolf. Or the kitchen puts you on a diet." Vittorio froze. Then he burst out laughing. A booming, unstoppable laugh that echoed through the restaurant and made every head turn. "She's dangerous," he said, wiping his eyes. "Keep her." Elena smiled, squeezed Luca's hand, and moved on to greet the guests. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer pretending. And no one in the room dared look away. Because that is how a quiet server became the most powerful woman in the city. She didn't win with bullets. She won with memory, restraint, and truth. And in a world full of wolves, the most dangerous creature isn't the one that bares its teeth first. It's the one that knows exactly when to bite. So what do you think? Did Elena make the right choice by sparing the man who destroyed her family? Or should she have taken her revenge? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of loyalty, betrayal, and old-world justice, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We've got another thriller coming next week, and trust me, you won't see it coming. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp.